Peter Criss, the Catman, founding drummer of Kiss, the man whose voice and vision helped ignite one of the greatest rock empires of the 20th century. A wildcat with hollow, black-rimmed eyes, thunderous drums, and a trembling voice capable of making an entire generation fall silent. He was the first heartbeat of the fire-breathing machine called Kiss, the voice behind Beth, the ballad that carried the band from radio obscurity to the top of the Billboard charts. A co-architect of a visual revolution unlike anything rock had ever seen. But from that very moment of triumph, the tragedy began. While Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley became the faces of success, Peter slipped into darkness on the very stage he helped build. Accidents, addiction, internal conflicts, isolation, being replaced in the studio, and then fired, not once, but many times. From being one of the four pillars of Kiss, he became the expendable one of a legend. There came a time when he had just $100,000 left to his name, staring down the barrel of a gun with the thought of ending everything. And then breast cancer struck, the final blow that seemed ready to wipe out whatever he had left. Why was the man who helped create Kiss from nothing cast out of the very world he built? What kept the Catman standing, surviving, and holding on to the drumsticks? Peter Criss's journey was never about the glare of stage lights, but about the brutal fight of a man nearly erased from the world's memory. Beneath that wildcat mask was a boy from Brooklyn, where violence and poverty were as common as air. Peter Criss was born into an Italian immigrant family, packed into crumbling apartments with street gangs lurking in the alleys. He didn't grow up among sheet music, but among car horns, shouting neighbors, and the fear of getting jumped if he walked home too late. To survive, he learned to snarl, scratch, and fight back, just like a real stray cat. His father was a quiet craftsman, and his mother, Loretta, tried to protect her son with Catholic faith and the kind of toughness only poor women possess. She was the one who noticed something different about Peter. His hands never stopped tapping. He tapped spoons on tables, pot lids in the kitchen, anything that could make sound in that tiny apartment. And in a place where dreams seemed forbidden, Peter found his first escape route: music. Not rock, jazz. Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, legends he looked up to like saviors. To study music, Peter would risk leaving his neighborhood, taking buses to Greenwich Village, and standing outside clubs for hours just to eavesdrop on masterful drum solos. While his friends spiraled into gang life, he dove into rhythm, because he knew music was the only thing that could save him from jail or worse. But his childhood wasn't the romantic tale of a boy with drumsticks and a dream. Peter once carried a homemade gun. He saw friends get arrested. He almost lost himself more than once in the chaos around him. Every bruise from every street fight was a reminder: if he stopped fighting, the world would win. Peter Criss didn't turn to music for fame. He turned to music to survive, and that will to survive would eventually lead him to a fateful encounter, where a nameless drummer was about to change the history of rock forever. Music became his only way out, and Peter was ready to gamble everything on it. He enrolled at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan with the initial dream of becoming a painter. But every time he picked up a pencil, his heart beat more to the rhythms of the streets than the lines on paper. He dropped the sketchboards, abandoned painting, and ran after the call of the drums. Fate came in the form of an old friend, Jerry Nolan, who would later become the drummer for the New York Dolls. Jerry was the first to fix Peter's grip on the sticks, to teach him sharper hits, and to give him something even more important: the pride of a stage drummer. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to hit with your heart, and the audience will feel it. With those lessons, Peter hardened his craft through local bands, the Barracudas, then Chelsea, and finally Lips, where he and Stan Penridge played in smoky bars for scattered drunks. No fame, no money, no praise. But he learned the one thing no school could teach: toughness. On stage, if you fall, no one picks you up. You either rise or you vanish. By 1972, when opportunity refused to knock, Peter decided to kick the door down. He placed a tiny classified ad in Rolling Stone. Drummer with vocal ability, looking for a band to go all the way. A bold declaration from someone still considered a nobody. But that ad caught the attention of two young musicians, burning with the desire to change the world: Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. They met Peter in a moldy basement in New York. No lights, no audience. Just three men and an unspoken manifesto. We will create something the world has never seen. And from the moment Peter's drumstick struck in that room, rock history began to shift. That basement meeting didn't just succeed, it created a new kind of rock creature. In 1973, Kiss was officially born with its original quartet: Gene Simmons, the ambitious demon; Paul Stanley, the seducer with his voice and gaze; Ace Frehley, the space-age guitarist firing electric riffs; and Peter Criss, the wild Catman with a fragile heart hidden beneath black and white makeup. They didn't want to be just a band. They wanted to shock the entire world, and they did. Guitars spitting fire, smoke swallowing the stage, explosions and flash bombs, a visual revolution rock had never seen before. Audiences didn't just hear Kiss, they saw Kiss, felt Kiss, detonating in every cell of their bodies. Amid the storm, Peter was the heartbeat of this beast. The Catman wasn't just a costume, it was who he was. Brooklyn street instinct, stray cat toughness, and a deep longing for love. Behind the kit, Peter didn't merely keep time, he steered the show's emotions. Their first albums, Kiss, 1974, Hotter Than Hell, 1974, and Dressed to Kill, 1975, flared up, but lacked the one spark that could break through radio barriers. Then came Destroyer, 1976, transforming Kiss from stage monsters into chart powerhouses. On that album, Peter stepped out of the shadows with Beth, a ballad with no fire, no bombs, just a trembling voice caught between music and home. "Beth, I hear you calling." He didn't need to scream. Peter pierced the softest part of rock. The song hit top 10 on Billboard, earned a People's Choice Award, and most importantly, saved Kiss from commercial failure. From a band for rebellious kids, they became mainstream legends. Rock and Roll Over, 1976, and Love Gun, 1977, then launched Kiss to the true summit of stardom. On these records, Peter's drumming didn't just hold the beat, it became part of the band's soul, heavy, instinctive, jazz-tinged, adding a unique weight in an era obsessed with speed. On Hard Luck Woman, his voice pulled listeners into raw sorrow, while I Want You and Ladies' Room felt like his drums were punching the audience straight in the chest. The albums exploded on the charts, proving Kiss wasn't only fire and spectacle, they had heart. Love Gun cemented them as full-blown pop icons. When Black Diamond kicked off a show, Peter's first snare hit was like a command forcing tens of thousands to leap to their feet screaming. But the greatest mark Peter left in that golden era remained Beth, 1976, a ballad unlike anything Kiss had ever done. Born from his own failing marriage, the song was a whispered apology from an artist torn between two loves, family and the stage. It soared into Billboard's top 10, won a People's Choice Award, and, crucially, reopened doors to radio that had slammed shut on Kiss. In a time when stations only wanted rock that was safe and sleek, Peter's vulnerability gave millions away into the black and white universe. From that moment, Peter wasn't just the drummer behind the guitar heroes, he was the emotional voice of the band, the fragile heart neither Kiss nor the fans realized they needed so badly. His drumming carried the same spirit, not a show-off of speed or a duel of technique, but rhythm, placed precisely where the audience's heartbeat raced fastest. His blend of jazz and rock gave his sound a primal force, yet a subtle looseness, rare in a band known for bombast and spectacle. Put simply, Peter was Kiss's pulse. But paradox is always faithful to those who live in the spotlight. The higher Kiss climbed, the deeper the cracks grew. The success of Beth made Peter Criss's name far too large for Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley to comfortably control. Peter represented emotion, something the Kiss machine increasingly saw as dangerous. And while the world believed they were an unbreakable family, the Catman was the first to hear the faint snapping beneath 7-inch platform boots and flawless makeup. By then, Kiss ruled everything. Platinum albums, sold-out global tours, comic books, action figures, merchandise flooding every store. They were a cultural phenomenon. But behind the triumph roared countless tiny fractures, ones only Peter truly felt. Gene and Paul tightened their grip on every decision. Ace spiraled into alcohol and drugs, and Peter carried the resentment of a man watching his voice being stripped away from the band he helped create. Every visit to the studio made him feel like a stranger in the house he built. He once admitted bitterly, "When the whole world was cheering for us, that was when I started disappearing." The peak of fame wasn't paradise. For Peter Criss, it was a doorway into another darkness, where the stage lights weren't bright enough to hide the cracks spreading every day between men who once called each other brothers. The success of Beth made Peter believe he was finally being heard. But that very moment was the first warning sign. A drummer hidden at the back suddenly becoming the emotional face of Kiss, something that made Gene and Paul uneasy. From 1978 to 1980, long-buried conflicts burst open. Peter wanted more creativity, more say in the studio, but every attempt was labeled as asking for too much. He turned to alcohol and cocaine to silence a suffocating ego, but the more he used, the worse his performance became. What began with a few off-tempo nights turned into shows where his playing forced the whole band to hold things together. A serious car accident damaged his right hand, and in rock, that's a direct blow to the future. When Unmasked, 1980, was released, Peter's face still appeared proudly on the cover, as if to declare Kiss were still the same four brothers. But behind that glossy lie was absolute cruelty. He didn't play a single drum note on the album. Every beat belonged to session drummer Anton Fig, a removal far more humiliating than any insult. Peter sat and watched someone else play drums for the band he built, realizing the end had been written long ago. No official band meeting, no goodbye hug, just a cold announcement. Peter Criss was fired from Kiss. For the first time in his life, the Catman was kicked out of the very world he had created with blood and tear-streaked drum hits. And in that moment, as Kiss kept running and he was left behind, Peter could not yet imagine the darkness ahead. Collapsing fame, a ruined personal life, and a shattered identity plummeting into the abyss. Leaving Kiss, Peter believed he was escaping a steel cage where his voice had been crushed. But only when he stepped outside the stage lights did he understand the brutality of reality. Not everyone survives leaving Kiss. Solo projects like Out of Control, 1980, and Let Me Rock You, 1982, vanished without a sound. Small venues, scarce bookings, and audiences driven more by curiosity than admiration pushed Peter into self-doubt. Money drained away, his career veered off course, and the name Peter Criss was reduced by the media to a single story: the man who walked away from success and fell flat on his face. As if striking back at life, Peter let alcohol and cocaine move in like cruel companions. He became unstable, easily angered, destroying the fragile relationships he had left. Many times, sitting behind a drum kit, his hands trembled, not from technique, but fear, that he was no longer the Catman. The tragedy peaked in 1991 when a homeless man in Los Angeles claimed to be Peter Criss. He told a sob story of addiction, streets, and loss. The media swarmed, headlines screamed, and the public pitied. But not the real Peter. Worse yet, the same people who once worshipped him were eager to believe a fraud. Peter was forced to appear on the Phil Donahue Show to confront the imposter and prove he was alive, though it felt like his legacy had already died. During those years, Peter was so alone that he once held a gun, ready to end everything quietly. But then he remembered how he escaped Brooklyn through music. If he died now, wouldn't that be surrender? He put the gun down, and he tapped the drums again. The tapping was weak, but it was the first sign of a comeback no one thought possible. Peter didn't know destiny still owed him a reunion, and another betrayal to follow, sharper than any wound he had ever felt. From the abyss, back into the light, destiny opened a door Peter never dared dream of. Kiss wanted a reunion. In 1996, at the Grammy Awards, when Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss stepped out in their original makeup, the world erupted. The press called it the resurrection of a legend, and Peter remembered that moment with a lump hidden behind the Catman smile. He was home again. The reunion tour lasted 18 months with 192 shows, grossing $144 million, one of the most successful rock tours of the 1990s. Every night when Peter's drums thundered into Black Diamond and stadiums shook beneath him, people believed every fracture had healed. He had sacrificed everything to be there once more: his health, his pride, and his faith in the men he once called brothers. But behind the curtain, the old cracks split open, deeper than ever. When Psycho Circus, 1998, was announced as the glorious product of the original lineup, Peter and Ace discovered that their drum and guitar parts were played by someone else. The band had hired session musicians to ensure quality. In other words, they no longer trusted Peter to have value within his own band. Peter was furious, Ace was crushed, but they were told, just stay quiet, take the money, and perform. The final nail in the breaking door came in Charleston in 2000. When Peter learned that Ace was getting paid $10,000 more per night while he was treated like a second-tier employee, his dignity hit rock bottom. In a rage fueled by decades of resentment, he stood up mid-show, smashed his drum kit to pieces, and hurled a tom-tom straight at Paul Stanley. In those few seconds, every illusion of brotherhood, friendship, and artistic unity collapsed. The crowd still screamed, but on stage, the Kiss family died again. Peter left the Kiss lineup quietly. No farewell party, no thank you, just an aging drummer walking away before the show was truly over. And as the door of Kiss slammed shut a second time, he could not know an even harsher battle was waiting ahead, one of life or death, with no stage to catch him. Yet even though the door to Kiss closed in Charleston, it cracked open once more, for only one reason: money. In 2002, promoters demanded at least 3 original members on stage, so Peter was called back. Not because they needed him, but because they needed the Catman's face. He still played like a worn-out warrior, protecting the last patch of ground he had in the band, but while the fans believed the Kiss family was reunited, backstage felt like a wire stretched to snapping. Everything revolved around contracts, salaries, and the ugly truth that Peter was no longer viewed as one of the four founders, just a replaceable employee. December 2003. The tour ended. Peter went home waiting for the next meeting, but nothing came. No email, no sit-down, no talk of the future, only cold silence. By 2004, the only thing he received was a blunt phone call from Paul Stanley. "You're too old to play 2 hours a night." No meeting, no handshake, no goodbye for the man who helped build the empire. Just one sentence, and it was over. Peter once stood on stage in Catman makeup believing it was his life's identity. But now that identity was stripped away cleanly and quickly, as if it had never belonged to him. Being fired once was painful. Being fired twice, and blamed for his age, was a humiliation impossible to swallow. He felt Kiss hadn't just taken his music. They had stolen the life he bled to build. Peter walked away from Kiss with a single question looping in his mind. What did I do wrong, other than wanting recognition in the family I created? But life doesn't pause to answer. It simply throws the next punch. This time not at his fame, but at his survival. And just when the Catman seemed exhausted from every battle, his body delivered one final warning. Death was no longer a distant shadow. It was standing at the door, waiting for him to let go. He was no longer on stage with Kiss, but that didn't mean he disappeared. Starting in 2005, Peter Criss began saving his own legacy through independent projects and fan events, places where he was finally seen, not as a replaceable employee, but as the man who laid the first brick of Kiss. In 2006, hope flickered alive when he reunited with Ace Frehley for a few small shows. Two exiles finding warmth in each other again, reminding the world that the Catman and the Spaceman once formed half the soul of Kiss. Then fate struck with its cruelest test yet. In 2007, Peter was diagnosed with breast cancer, a rare illness in men. While the world assumed he had already been beaten down enough, Peter chose to fight. A full mastectomy of his left breast, long rounds of radiation, a body falling apart, but a spirit refusing to bow. He told his doctor, "I have to live. I still have drums to play." After every treatment, if he could stand, he went to his drum kit. No crowd, no spotlight, only heartbeat and survival. This became the Catman's greatest battle, to protect his own name. He refused to let someone else paint on the cat face and claim that was history. He refused to let anyone erase his story from the legend. If Kiss could replace him on stage, then Peter would tell his story himself, through music, through memoir, through simply staying alive. Yet even after defeating illness, one question still haunted him. Could a legend stripped of his wings ever find a sky of his own? He survived cancer, but the fight never stopped. From 2008 on, Peter Criss chose a different kind of stage, smaller, without fireworks or screaming crowds. He appeared at Kiss fan conventions, charity events, performing only a few songs but enough to remind the world that the real Catman was still here. No stage bombs, just laughter, autographs, and backstage stories to reconnect with fans who never forgot who the original drummer of Kiss was. His strongest strike back arrived in 2012 with the release of his memoir, Makeup to Breakup. Across 400 razor-sharp pages, he avoided no dark corner, internal conflicts, silent replacements, the feeling of being treated as surplus in the very empire he helped build. That book was the testimony of truths he had carried through decades of dust, and it restored his image as an artist with a heart, with wounds, and with the right to speak. 2 years later, at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in 2014, Peter stood beside Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and Ace Frehley. No makeup, no drums, no performance. Just their shared presence was symbolic enough. Four men who once couldn't stand each other, now honored equally in rock history. The audience rose to their feet. Peter smiled. His face seemed to say, "I am finally back where I belong." Off stage, he and his wife Gigi built a quiet new life. Small art exhibits, free-spirited music projects, peaceful evenings with cats, and his old drum set. He no longer had to fight for the spotlight. He just needed to tell his truth. Yet even with dignity reclaimed, Peter still refused to put the sticks down, because one last show, one last heartbeat of the drums, still waited. In 2017, at the Cutting Room in New York, Peter Criss walked onto a stage for the final time as a performer. No platform boots, no Catman makeup, just Peter, the man who lived, fought, fell, and rose more times than anyone knew. When the soft intro of Beth began, he closed his eyes. Not to relive glory, but to thank life for letting him sing once more. The ballad that once saved Kiss from being forgotten now saved the soul of the man who first gave it breath more than 40 years ago. Each lyric was a chapter, each breath a farewell. The small room held its breath. Fans cried. Fellow musicians offered total respect. No media circus, no grand campaign. A moment for those who had loved the Catman for real. When the last note faded, Peter set down his drumsticks. This time not because he was fired, not because he was abandoned, but because he chose the ending himself. Proud, clear, complete. He retired from performing, but not from living. Because for Peter Criss, music was never the lights. It was the heartbeat. As long as his heart keeps beating, the rhythm will continue. Even if only inside a small room in New Jersey, where a whole new chapter of his life has begun. When the lights went out, only the real person remained. And for Peter, that truth was forever tied to the name Lydia Di Leonardo. They met in the late 1960s, when Peter was still an unknown drummer playing smoky East Coast bars. Lydia appeared as one of the few calm havens in the chaotic life of that hot-headed, impulsive Brooklyn kid. She saw Peter before the Catman existed. She loved the artist for his vulnerability, not for a spotlight that didn't yet exist. They married in 1970 when Kiss was still nothing. When Peter was just a young man clinging to a dream of escaping a gritty neighborhood. Lydia became his strongest supporter, the one who held their world together while he chased the drums as a promise of freedom from poverty. Then, Kiss exploded. From forgotten bar gigs to global phenomenon, and Peter began losing himself in alcohol, cocaine, and a whirlwind he was never prepared for. Lydia, once his partner, slowly became the person left behind hotel doors, waiting while Peter returned drunk from nights he wouldn't explain. Conflict reached its peak when Beth became Kiss's biggest hit. Peter had written the song out of Lydia's loneliness. The wife, waiting endlessly while he chose the band again and again. But ironically, the one thing he wrote about her pain became the very thing that pulled him further away. The spotlight took her husband piece by piece. They had a daughter, Jenna Lee, but parenthood couldn't save a marriage already cracking. Fame gave Peter endless distractions and white powder illusions to fill the void, while Lydia was forced to accept a cruel truth. She had loved an artist, and the artist now loved the stage more than anything else. In 1979, they divorced. No explosive final fight, no dramatic plea, just two people who once meant everything, now unable to find a reason to speak. Lydia walked out of Peter's life in silence, leaving behind a Catman already losing himself inside the myth he helped create. But that heartbreak was only the beginning of Peter Criss's romantic tragedies. because ahead of him lay more marriages. Each one a scar, each scar carving deeper the question. A man can drum to save the world, but can he save his own heart? If Lydia was the anchor of his anonymous years, then Deborah Jensen arrived right as Peter stood at the sharpest crossroads of his life. Freshly departed from Kiss, fame free-falling, a backstage void wide enough to lose a man entirely. Deborah, a radiant Los Angeles model of the late 70s, came from a world opposite of Peter's rough Brooklyn roots. They met, fell hard, and married in 1979, like flooring the gas pedal in a desperate escape from the wreckage behind them. This wasn't youthful fantasy. It was two wounded adults clinging to each other. In 1981, their daughter Jenny was born, a rare moment where Peter felt redeemed, a new family, a chance to be a better father. But fatherhood requires stability, and Peter's life then was an endless cycle of booze, cocaine, and failed contracts. After Kiss, his solo albums stalled, money fluctuated, and Deborah, used to the brightness of showbiz, had to endure the dim silence of a man coming home defeated, his masculine pride dripping through the room like a sour scent. Arguments grew as everything they cared about slipped out of reach. Peter's career, Deborah's public image, and Jenny's future. Tabloids spun rumors. Friends stepped in. Doctors warned. If Peter didn't stop, he'd lose what was left. He tried, rehab, rehearsals, searching for rhythm, and then he slipped again. Some nights he held his sleeping child, promising Deborah he'd change by morning. Morning came, work didn't, and those promises evaporated like smoke. Their marriage became a boat tethered between two opposing currents. Deborah needed stability, Peter needed a new launch pad. They both loved Jenny, but love for their child couldn't mend the cracks widening daily between the adults. In 1984, they signed divorce papers, not from lack of love, but from exhaustion. Peter clung to his role as a father like a lifeline, while Deborah quietly retreated to protect their daughter from noise and chaos. Years later, whenever he spoke of that time, Peter's voice softened. He knew Deborah entered his life when he was least capable of loving someone fully. And it was that emptiness that eventually taught him he needed something different from the spotlight. A real home. A companion who would stay even when the drums went quiet. A destiny that would later arrive in the name Gigi. When his second marriage ended, Peter realized he was standing on a line. If he fell now, no one would be there to pull him back up. The once blazing fame of the Catman was reduced to ashes scattered across tabloid pages. His solo career struggled, debts piled up, and even his relationship with his daughter Jenny was fragile as old paper. Peter once admitted, "I could make an entire stadium scream, but I couldn't keep a roof from collapsing over my own family." And in that moment, Gigi appeared. Not as a clinging fan chasing Kiss's leftover spotlight, and not as someone eager to patch his broken heart, but as the first person who looked past the Catman's makeup and saw a man exhausted, desperate to be trusted one more time. They met so naturally that Peter often calls it a rare reward life finally granted him. Gigi came into Peter's world with a calmness he had never known. She didn't ask about Kiss, didn't mention Beth, didn't care how many millions of records he'd sold. What mattered to her was whether Peter could manage a decent sip of coffee in the morning. They fell in love slowly. A love without fireworks, without champagne, but with quiet laughter in the kitchen, with late nights watching old VHS tapes, and with Gigi holding Jenny Lee's hand as if the girl were her own. For the first time in his life, Peter felt he could be a good father, a decent husband, things he always feared he wasn't capable of. But misfortune never let Peter go easily. When he rejoined Kiss for their reunions only to be treated like a temp worker in the band he co-founded, Gigi was the one backstage hearing him punch walls in rage. When tabloids screamed about money disputes, when someone else painted on the Catman face and took his spot on stage, Gigi held him while he cried. And when the doctor said, "breast cancer," a phrase that hits men with a unique shock, as if masculinity itself were being stripped away, it was Gigi who signed the surgery papers and the promise to stay. Even if all that remained was a Peter missing one side of his chest, a Catman unsure if he'd ever have the strength to climb on stage again. They married in 1998. No stage, no flashing lights, no magazine covers. Just a small promise big enough to change the rest of his life. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You just have to live. And Peter lived, not because of Kiss's spotlight, but because of the quiet light in her eyes. Years later, asked what he still wanted from life, Peter smiled. "I once thought I'd die in the middle of a stage explosion. Turns out all I needed was someone waiting for me when the music stopped." With Gigi, Peter Criss finally found what fame and music could never give him, a home where his heart could rest, a place where the Catman could remove the mask and be loved as himself. Since that day, Gigi hasn't only been his wife, she became the one keeping time for the rest of his life. Through sleepless nights filled with nightmares of his Kiss past, through the slow process of retraining his arms after surgery, Gigi sat beside him, counting breaths to remind him he was never alone. She worked with the doctors, handled every medical detail, and pushed him back into the public eye, not to chase fame, but to prove one truth: Peter Criss did not die with Kiss. In 2012, when Makeup to Breakup became a bestseller, fans could finally hear the story straight from the Catman himself. Gigi stood behind every page, cutting out wounds that didn't need to bleed again, keeping the ones that mattered, so the world would understand how deeply he had been hurt. And when Peter decided to bid farewell to the stage in 2017 with that emotional final show at the Cutting Room, it was Gigi who placed the first snare in his hands, whispering, "You don't need to play for applause, just play because you love it." He performed Beth that night, not for thousands of fans, but for the one woman who had saved him from the silent abyss. Today, in their peaceful home in New Jersey, they're living the life Peter once thought he'd never have. Morning coffee, cats to feed, old movies to watch, and sometimes a few playful beats on the drums. No alcohol, no smoke-filled arenas, no booze, no rushed contracts, just two people, a Catman who once exhausted himself fighting the world, and the woman who taught him how to curl up like a gentle cat in the safety of love. Peter Criss was once labeled the weakest member of Kiss, but that was the judgment of those who measured worth only through technique and statistics. Those who truly listened with their hearts always knew that Peter was the soul of the band. His drumming didn't flaunt speed or metal-level technical madness. He played like a jazz musician thrown into a rock battlefield. Every strike heavy with sorrow, every silence intentional. And with just one ballad, Beth, he permanently changed Kiss's DNA. That song opened the doors for the band to dominate radio, score gold and platinum records, and step into places like the Hollywood Bowl and Madison Square Garden, venues that once shut their doors to raspy, blood-soaked rock. But beyond music, Peter left behind something far greater than stage lights: uncompromising honesty. He dared to admit his addictions. He dared to reveal betrayal. He dared to stand up to the very empire he helped build, just to protect one thing: his identity. Today, even if someone else puts on the Catman makeup on stage, the heart behind that mask, only Peter. ever had it. Young drummers come to him not to master technique, but to learn how to turn pain into rhythm. People struggling in life find from him a message. You can fall 100 times, but rise just once more, and you still continue. Criss once stood on top of the world, and was then pushed into the abyss without mercy. But here's the thing about those who live by the drums. Their hearts don't know how to quit. He is no flawless legend. He is covered in scars, mistakes, and sadness hidden beneath the Catman's paint. Yet those flaws are exactly what make him a rare symbol of truth in an industry built on artificial glitter. Peter survived, and in surviving, he won. If you've ever paused hearing "Beth, I hear you calling," or ever felt that a single drum beat could keep your life from falling apart, share your feelings in the comments, because Criss's music only truly lives as long as we remember the heartbeat of the Catman.